Hello, welcome to the Reading Corner. We're so glad that you've joined us again on Channel 5 to hear some more good stories. And I welcome today boys and girls from Drake Middle School. We're glad you could come. And I'd like for them to tell you their names and what grade they're in. And let's start with you.
Janine Mask in 5th grade.
I'm Jay Swamidas and I'm in 5th grade.
I'm Roland DeWitt and I'm in 6th grade.
I'm Andrea Mattis, I'm in 5th grade.
I'm Tasha Max, I'm in the 6th grade.
Well, welcome all of you, both 5th and 6th graders. It's nice to have you here. And our special guest host today is Miss Cynthia Mask. Thank you for coming.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, we're glad you could come. And Ms. Mask is Janine's mother. So we're glad to have you, mother and daughter, here too.
Thanks.
This week, we are reading stories by a special author. And this author is special in a lot of ways, but one particular way is that she is an Alabama author. And I know that many of you who are watching on television, and you boys and girls here, know who Catherine Tucker Wyndham is. She is most famous for her ghost stories, and her first book was called 13 Alabama Ghosts and Jeffrey. Have you all read parts of that book, stories from that book? Do you know who Jeffrey is? Who is Jeffrey, Janine?
He's a ghost, and I think he's good.
Okay. He's not a scary ghost. Well, do you know why she put him in the name? Is that book called 13 Tennessee Ghosts and Jeffrey? Do you know why she puts Jeffrey in the title of all of her books? Jeffrey lives in her house. One time she had some guests at her house, and they were sitting around eating dinner, and somebody started taking pictures. And when the pictures were developed, there was this thing that you could see through in one of the pictures. And strange things happen in this house. Not anything scary, but weird things like windows open and the adding machine starts working all by itself, and furniture gets moved around, and Mrs. Wyndham says, well, it must be Jeffrey. And she says you don't have to believe in ghosts to enjoy stories about ghosts. And she got interested in ghosts because of Jeffrey in her house, and she began to ask people to tell her ghost stories they knew about. And that's how she collected all of her stories for her ghost stories. And she went around to different places and talked to people. And the stories in her books are not really scary. They're just really interesting, aren't they? They make you wonder. Well, I found out some other things about Catherine Tucker Wyndham, and one thing, do you know where she lives? Who knows where she lives? She lives in Selma, Alabama, which is not too far from Montgomery. And she lives in an old house, but not a spooky house. And I found out that she likes old furniture. And when she sits down to write her stories or her books that she writes, she sits in an antique cane-back wheelchair. Now, she said she bought the wheelchair just because she liked it, but then it turned out to be a very comfortable chair to sit in to do your writing, and I guess when you wanted to move or turn around to sharpen your pencil, you just wheel yourself around, and it was easier than getting up and down. Her writing desk is a desk that was in her daddy's office when he was a banker in Thomasville, Alabama. Now, Mrs. Wyndham has written ghost story books about Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, Georgia, and she's written, she wrote an autobiography called A Surrogamy of Stories, and you'll have to read that book to find out what a surrogamy is. And that book happens to be in your media center at Drake Middle School, I know, because that's where I first read it. And you'll really enjoy reading that if you like to read autobiographies. And Mrs. Wyndham is also a famous storyteller. And she goes all over the United States telling stories, especially her ghost stories. And she's also written a book about Alabama that doesn't have ghost stories in it. It's just stories about people and events in Alabama. Has anybody ever looked at this book? Well, you are going to want to go to the library of the Media Center and get this, because it's just full of wonderful stories about things that have happened and people who have lived in Alabama. So I'm going to read you something from this in a little while, but before that, I want us to hear a ghost story from 13 Tennessee Ghosts.
As do many Tennessee tales, the story of Long Dog involves John Morrell, the notorious outlaw of the frontier. It seems that back when Morrell was terrorizing the countryside with his bold robberies and his brutal murders, back in the late 1820s and early 1830s, a family was passing through East Tennessee on the way to a new home near Nashville. They made camp for the night beneath a spreading white oak tree between Kingsport and Surgoinsville. While they were sleeping, Morrell and his gang, depraved men all, fell upon the travelers and killed them. Morrell even strangled the faithful hound dog that tried to protect the family. Some years later, possibly after Morrell had been imprisoned for his crimes, settlers traveling the old stage route to Nashville via Bristol, Rogersville, and Knoxville began to tell of seeing a mighty peculiar dog, a ghost dog, along the way. The dog, they said, would come out of the thick shadows of a white oak tree near Surgoinsville, and he would run along beside their wagons, run without making a sound. Every now and then the dog would leap up on a wagon and sniff around. The dog acts like he's hunting for somebody he thinks a heap of, they said. What does he look like? Well, he sure doesn't look like any natural dog. He's long, more than twice as long as any dog you've ever seen. I'd say he's as long as a plow line, and he shines in the dark. It's sort of like he had maybe a dozen lanterns inside him shining through his skin. Or maybe it's like he's made out of a big hunk of foxfire. It's scary looking, all right. All of the travelers who encountered the ghost dog told almost identical stories. Not everybody believed the stories. One of the doubters was young Marcus Hamblin, a husky 18-year-old who lived with his family near Surgoinsville. A ghost dog! If I ever saw such a glowing critter, I'd kill him and skin him and nail his hide up on the side of the barn. Or maybe I'd cut him and use all those glowing lights to go coon hunting on dark nights, Hamblin boasted. He didn't believe in ghosts of any kind. Not long after he had made that boast, Marcus Hamblin, Hamblin County was named for that family, was walking home from a frolic one dark night. As he neared an old white oak tree, the ghost dog came trotting out of the shadows toward him. Marcus snatched a rail from the fence beside the road. "Come on, old Long Dog, I'll kill you dead," he warned. Long Dog never slowed up, just came trotting right on toward Hamblin. When the dog got close enough, Hamblin drew back with a fence rail and hit Long Dog as hard as he could. The rail went clean through the luminous dog. Hamblin forgot all his boasting. He dropped the rail and ran. Long Dog ran right along by him. Hamblin ran faster. So did Long Dog. Hamblin speeded up. So did Long Dog. Hamblin ran until he didn't have a bit of breath left. He stumbled and sprawled out in the road. Long Dog squatted on his haunches right beside Hamblin and waited. As soon as his breath and strength returned, Hamblin got up and ran again. Long Dog ran right beside him. They ran down the road side by side, Long Dog adjusting his pace to Hamblin's until Hamblin succumbed to exhaustion again. Long Dog waited patiently beside the prostrate youth. When Hamblin caught his breath, off they went again. This strange race kept up until Hamblin and Long Dog reached a particular spot in the road where, observers said, Long Dog always disappeared. That's what happened then. Long Dog completely vanished. One minute he was trotting along beside Hamlin, the next minute he was gone. Hamlin stumbled home. He was considerably shaken by the experience. That wasn't the last time Marcus Hamlin saw Long Dog, but it was the last time he ever tried to kill the ghost dog or to run away from him. In fact, as time passed, Hamlin grew so fond of Long Dog and looked forward with pleasure to their infrequent encounters near the oak tree on the road to Sirgoinsville. Many people through the years saw that ghost dog, Long Dog, but probably nobody ever felt as friendly toward him as Marcus Hamlin did, and nobody ever told stories about him better than Hamlin did. Hamlin used to end his stories by saying, "Long Dog didn't mean any harm. He never tried to hurt anybody, though he did scare a lot of folks. That old ghost dog was just out there trying to find his murdered master. He must have loved his master an awful lot. I hope he found him somewhere." It has been a good many years since anybody up in that part of Tennessee has seen Long Dog. Maybe the road has changed, or maybe people drive by too fast now. Or maybe Long Dog has been reunited with his master, the way Marcus Hamlin hoped he would be.
Well, what about that? Do you think that you would run if you saw the ghost dog? I think I would too. I like that story. Thank you. Now, you can go and find that book and read some more stories from that book. Now, I have, as I said, this book about Alabama that Ms. Wyndham has written called Alabama One Big Front Porch. And she says that this is where in Alabama everybody likes to tell the stories. And back in the days when people had big front porches, you'd sit outside at night after supper and talk. The neighbors would come by and the kinfolks would come by, and everybody would tell stories about things that happened during that day, or they might tell tall tales about things that probably didn't happen, or they might tell an exaggerated tale about something that did happen. But that's how stories are shared with people, and that's what Mrs. Wyndham is trying to do in this book. She wants to share with her readers stories, interesting stories about Alabama. Now, let me share this with you. Folks all over Alabama take real pride in their vegetable gardens, tending and coaxing them and bragging about them. Although small tractors and power equipment are popular with gardeners, the sight of a patient mule pulling a plow is not uncommon. In late April and early May, "How's your garden?" replaces the usual "How are you?" when you greet somebody all over Alabama. Now, I'm going to tell you something about a mule. She says if the mule is gray and you see the mule, he must be stamped for good luck. If you see a gray mule, you got to stamp him. Now, you stamp a mule like this. You lick your right thumb. Everybody do that. Come on, lick your right thumb. You put it, stamp your palm like this, and then you do this. And that's called stamping a mule. And if you do that, when you see a gray mule, you'll have good luck. Now, there used to be this elderly couple down in Clark County who had a garden as neat as a freshly ironed handkerchief. The rows were surveyor straight. There never was a weed or a stray sprig of grass in that plot. And even the vegetable plants themselves appeared to be of uniform size. Nothing marred the perfection of that garden. Neighbors used to say that when the couple finished working in that garden each afternoon, they walked backwards to the gate, raking as they walked so that their footsteps wouldn't track up the garden. It could have been this couple, or it could have been a gardener living close by who had the encounter with the rabbit. Now, whoever it was had a mighty sharp hoe. Now, the way the story is told is that this rabbit was hopping along between some rows of vegetables, and he hopped right along beside a gardener who was chomping a clump of nut grass with his hoe. That gardener swung that hoe at the rabbit and chopped down on him and cut him clean in two, right across the middle. Now immediately the gardener was sorry for what he'd done. Well, he was a tender-hearted man, and he hadn't intended to kill that rabbit. So he reached down quickly and picked up the two halves of the rabbit and pressed them back together again. The cut had been made by such a sharp hoe that the halves fit perfectly. And when he put the rabbit down on the ground, the animal went hopping right off between those rows of beans. Now there was one mistake though. This man was in a hurry when he did this. And man had put the rear half of the rabbit on upside down. Now it didn't seem to bother the rabbit too much, because he'd hop along on his front legs for a while till he got tired, then he'd turn over and hop along on his back legs a while. Now lots of folks say they've seen that rabbit, or they say they've seen that rabbit. But that tale about the rabbit isn't nearly as strange as other stories that are told about snakes and other animals on front porches all around Alabama. Now, tales about snakes are something to hear. Now, up in Franklin County, they tell about a stupid or a very nearsighted chicken snake that crawled into a hen's nest, and he swallowed what he took to be an egg. Well, it wasn't an egg he swallowed, but a china doorknob that they'd put in the nest so the hen would think it had an egg. Now that knob was mighty uncomfortable, and it worked its way about halfway down through the snake's body when the snake decided to crawl through the handle of a broken jug. Well, he couldn't crawl all the way through because the doorknob stopped him. But he crawled as far as he could, and he got just so far, and he found a real egg, and he swallowed the egg. Well, then he was trapped. He couldn't go forward because of the doorknob, and he couldn't back out because of the egg. Well, the owner of that raided hen's nest found that snake and got rid of him in one blow. And then he took it with its bulges and the jug handle down to the country store and sat it out on the porch of the store for all the neighbors to see when they came along. Now, he knew wouldn't anybody believe this story if they didn't see this. But finally, the unpleasantness associated with the decomposition of the snake made it necessary to bury it. You know what happened, don't you? Well, now, there are some other tales about snakes that some folks say just don't exist. Those people that know all about snakes, they say there's no such thing as a coach whip. You ever heard of a coach whip snake? Well, people tell about coach whip snakes all the time down in Alabama on front porches. Now, these snakes are long and treacherous, and they chase their victims. If they get after you, they'll chase you, and as fast as you can go, you can hardly outrun them. They can go at astonishing speeds. They coil themselves around the captive's legs and whip them to death. Now that snake's long tail, they say, lashes just like a plaited leather coach whip, which of course is how the snake got its strange name. Even rarer than a coach whip is a hoop snake. Have you ever heard of a hoop snake? Well, a hoop snake, authorities on the subject say, doesn't go crawling or slithering along the ground the way most snakes do. The hoop snake has this rare ability to curl itself into a circle and go rolling along. It's sort of like a skinny bicycle tire, and wherever it wants to go. Now, the hoop snake doesn't bite with fangs. In fact, I don't think it has teeth. They say that the hoop snake carries a very potent poison in the tip end of his tail. Now, that poison is so awful that if it stings you, you will immediately swell up to enormous size. Now, there used to be a lot of hoop snakes or stories about them up in center Alabama. And one story that a man told about, he was out hunting one day and he heard this rustling of leaves, and he went out, looked around behind him to see what was happening, and here was this hoop snake coming through these leaves after him. Well, he tried to get away, but he couldn't get away. And he got real upset about it, and he, let's see now, he forgot all about his hunting, and he dropped his gun, and he took off running. Well, just about the time he moved, that snake whipped out its tail at him and hit a tree. Now, it was just a little old sapling. You know what that is? Just this one of these little beginnings of a tree. And his tail hit that sapling. Well, the man was mighty glad that it got the sapling and not him. Well, the next day, he came back to get his gun, and that sapling had swelled to a good-sized tree. Well, he went home and got his saw and cut that tree into logs for his fireplace. Well, he needed a wheelbarrow to haul his logs home, so he went home to get his wheelbarrow, and when he got back, those logs had swelled to such a size that he couldn't fit any of them into the wheelbarrow. So he went back home to get his neighbors to bring them to come and help him load these logs up. And when he got there, they were big enough to sawmill. So they took these logs down to this little sawmill they had down there, and they sawed up enough lumber from those logs to build 8 6-room houses. Now, they did that. So they did. They built these houses. Now, everything would have been just fine except that the man decided that he would paint those houses. Well, what happened was that the turpentine in the paint drew all that poison out of that wood, and all those houses shrunk up to the size of a birdhouse. And the way some folks tell the story, each one of those birdhouses has Sea Rock City written on the roof. And when you ride up North Alabama, you'll see some of these little old bitty houses that shrunk up. Now, there's some more things about snakes you need to know. That one thing is, if you ever kill a snake, if you burn it up in a fire, don't ever get near the smoke. Don't let the smoke get in your eyes, because it'll make you go blind. That's what they say. And everybody in Alabama knows that if you kill a snake, you hang it upside down over a fence and it'll rain. So, if you need some rain now, you know how to get it. But there's one comforting thing you need to know, is that no poisonous snake will crawl across a rope. So I reckon if you want to protect your house from snakes, you can put these ropes around your house, and the snakes won't come. Now, those are the kind of stories that people tell when they sit on front porches in Alabama. And this book has all kinds of stories about famous people that you've heard of. There's a story in here about a man who was buried, and I can't remember his name. I can't remember who it was now, but he was buried in one town, and they put a monument on top of his grave. And the people in another town down the road thought he should be buried there, so in the dark of night, the people in this town came and removed the monument, dug up the man's coffin, and moved it down the road, and he's been moved several times. But there are also other kinds of funny stories in this book, too, that you would enjoy reading. So I hope you'll look for this and see if it's in your media center. If it's not, ask your media specialist to get it for you. Boys and girls, I hope you'll go to the library or to the media center at your school and look for some books by Catherine Tucker Wyndham. Learn some interesting things about Alabama and some ghost stories to tell when the nights are dark. Thank you for being here, boys and girls. Hope you had a good time. And thank you for coming, Ms. Mask.
Thank you.
We'll look for you next week on Channel 5, boys and girls, when we'll hear some more good stories. Bye-bye.
The one who